Hello everyone. I welcome you again to our series of lectures on enhancing international understanding. And today we will take up a very important organization called OPEC, which stands for Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC is a permanent intergovernmental organization created at the Baghdad Conference held between 10th to 14th of September 1960. Its founding members were Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. OPEC had its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, in the first 5 years of its existence. This was moved to Vienna, Austria on September 1st, 1965. The 5 founding members were later joined by 9 other members: Qatar in 1961, Indonesia in 1962. It suspended its membership from January 2009 to December 2015. Libya in 1962, United Arab Emirates UAE in 1967, Algeria in 1969, Nigeria in 1971, Ecuador 1973. It suspended its membership from December 1992 to October 2007. Angola in 2007 and Gabon 1975 terminated its membership in January 1995 but rejoined in July 2016. So if you are wondering why some of the countries suspended or terminated their membership, then let me tell you. Countries that export petroleum at relatively low level have limited negotiating power as OPEC member. And on top of it, they have to pay the annual membership fee. OPEC expects its member to strictly adhere to its production quotas. So, Ecuador withdrew from OPEC in 1992 because it was unwilling to pay the annual membership fee and it felt it needed to produce more oil than what it was allowed under the quota. But later, in October 2007, it rejoined OPEC. Gabon also had same problem. Whereas for Indonesia, it had become a net importer of oil and it was unable to meet its production quota. It rejoined the organization in January 2016. Now, if you remember our lecture on GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, you will see some interesting things. 4 of the 6 founding members of GCC are also the members of OPEC. So except Bahrain and Oman, the other 4, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and UAE are the members of OPEC also. But now, if you look at the founding members of OPEC, you have 2 interesting members, Iran and Iraq. Both of these are not a part of GCC. Now, you may again be wondering why. Here, we have to understand that GCC was formed because of the Iranian Revolution and the outbreak of Iran-Iraq War. Here, the main aim of the formation of Council was to contain the impact of Iranian Revolution. While all the members of the Council were supportive of Saddam's invasion of Iran, they did not want to directly join the war, and making Iraq as a member of GCC would have implied the other members of GCC were also declaring war on Iran. Also, all the 6 members of GCC were very conservative monarchies, whereas Iraq was a secular and socialist regime. Also, the members of GCC were all allies of United States, whereas Iraq was closer to Soviet Union. So neither of the superpowers would have liked Iraq joining GCC. And if you have watched the movie Airlift, you must be aware that Iraq had invaded Kuwait. Iraq was ruled by Ba'ath Party, which wanted to overthrow the governments of the GCC countries and unify all Arabs under one country. Please note, Iraq had observer status in GCC until Saddam's invasion of Kuwait. Now, with American invasion and overthrow of the Ba'athist regime, the GCC member wanted to include Iraq as its member. But with Shiite majority gaining power in Baghdad, this is highly unlikely because they are more likely to form closer ties to Iran. Now, Saudi Arabia has tried to expand the council by inviting 2 other conservative monarchies, Jordan and Morocco, primarily to counter the growing influence of Iran in the region. And the Sunnis have a specific term for the growing influence of Shias in the region. It is called Shia's Crescent. Now, let us spend a couple of minutes on this table and try to understand the Shia's influence in the region. This table will be very important for us to understand the dynamics in the Middle East, including the Syrian crisis, Yemen crisis, the revolution in Bahrain, or some other sectarian conflict that may arise in future. Now, if you look at Syria, it has 13% of Alawi's population, which is considered to be a sect of Shia, and it has roughly 70% Sunni population. Please note, there has been no Syrian census including a question about religion since 1960. These are all estimates. Since Hafiz al-Assad, father of Bashar al-Assad, took power in 1970, the government has been dominated by a political elite led by al-Assad family. Also, Hafiz al-Assad was instrumental in establishing Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party to power in Syria. As we have already discussed, the aim of Ba'ath Party was to unite all Arabs under one nation. But after Hafiz al-Assad took power, he tried to de-radicalize the Ba'ath Party. He sided with USSR during the Cold War for support against Israel. So, he gave up the idea of unified Arab world, but he wanted to be seen as the defender of Arab interest against Israel. They had earlier come under pressure in the Islamic uprising during 1970s and 1980s. But now even greater pressure has resulted from the current Syrian civil war. Well, there is a lot to discuss about Syria and the present Syrian crisis, but we'll take it up some other day. Let's now move to Yemen. Shias are 35%, whereas Sunnis are 65%. As we all know, there is a crisis going on in Yemen. The problem in Yemen is rather unique. It started with internal rivalry between the president and the military commander, but now it has turned into a sectarian conflict. There is a popular uprising in the north by the Houthi rebels, who are again a sect of Shia and are supported by Iran, whereas the current government of the President Hadi is supported by Saudi Arabia. Again, Yemen crisis is another long story which we will take up later. Now we can move to Lebanon. Here the population distribution is rather unique because both Shia and Sunni have same percentage population, roughly 27 to 33%, and the remaining 35 to 40% are Christians. They have a unique way of power distribution. The president is always a Christian. The speaker of the parliament is a Shia Muslim and the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim. But well, they still have a lot of problems. You must have heard of a group called Hezbollah. Hezbollah, or Party of God, is a Shia Islamist militant group that started as a small militia before joining the Lebanese politics. It was funded by Iran in order to fight the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Its manifesto called for the destruction of Israel, but currently it is active in Lebanese politics and is considered a proxy of Iran. Now let's move to Bahrain. Bahrain has almost 60 to 70% of Shia population, whereas only 25 to 30% of Sunni population. If you remember, it is a part of GCC. It is a monarchy with a Sunni head. Now let's move to Azerbaijan. It has almost 80 to 85% of Shia population and 10 to 15% of Sunni population. Here the government is secular, as are all other breakaway factions of USSR which have Muslim dominated population like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, etc. Now let's move to Iraq, which has 60 to 65% of Shia population and roughly 32 to 37% of Sunni population. Here, after Saddam Hussein regime was overthrown, the government is Shia dominated. And finally we have Iran itself, where 95% of the population is Shia. Now, if you come to think of it, most of the crisis that you are seeing in Middle East is because of Shia and Sunni divide. If it is not for Shia or Sunni divide, then it is because of Israel. Now that the sanctions from Iran have been lifted, it is likely to become a dominant force in Middle East, which Saudi Arabia would not like to see. So with this demographic breakup and our little understanding so far, we can be assured that Middle East will continue to have some problem or the other until Iran and Saudi Arabia both agree to live in peace and let the region be in peace. Now, let's get back to OPEC again. The main objective of OPEC is to ensure stabilization of oil prices in international markets and securing a steady income to oil producing nations. It was formed by ending the monopoly of the Seven Sisters cartel, which controlled around 85% of world's petroleum reserves at a time. OPEC currently has an estimated 45% of global oil production and 80% of the world's proven oil reserves. In most economic texts, you will see the example of OPEC when they try to explain cartel, which by the way is anti-competition and illegal. But as you might have already guessed, that these are few of the richest countries in the world on which a lot of other countries are dependent. So forget about taking any action against this group. The OPEC conference is the supreme authority of the organization and consists of delegation normally headed by the oil ministers of the member countries. The chief executive of the organization is the OPEC Secretary General. Currently, Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo is the Secretary General. He is from Nigeria and he started his 3-year term on 1st of August 2016. The de facto head of OPEC, no prizes for guessing, is Saudi Arabia. It is the largest and most profitable oil exporter. As of 2015, the population of the OPEC member countries was roughly 720 million. Interestingly, Indonesia and Nigeria contributed to around 60% of the population. Now, if we look at the GDP figures of the OPEC members, it is almost 3.9 trillion in 2015. We also see there is a huge dip from 2014 to 2015. This is largely on account of decreased oil prices. In 2014, the GDP was around $4.35 trillion. Again, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia and Nigeria account for almost 50% of the GDP figures. Now, if we move to the export figures, it is roughly $1.13 trillion in 2015. Whereas in 2014, it was around 1.6 trillion. Again, this loss in exports is largely due to the decrease in oil prices. If we look at the values of exports, UAE contributes the highest. It's almost 29% of all exports. If we look at the petroleum exports in 2015, it is 518 billion US dollars. Whereas in 2012, when the oil prices were at peak, it was around 1.2 trillion US dollars. So it has reduced by more than half in last 3 years. And well, when it comes to the values of petroleum exports, Saudi Arabia takes the lead by contributing to around 31%. The value of imports in the OPEC member countries amounted to 970 billion US dollars. This was almost $1.06 trillion in 2014. Now, if we look at the financial health of our OPEC countries, it was not so good in 2015. The overall current account balance was roughly minus 100 billion US dollars. And if we look at the member countries, we see except UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Iran, all countries had negative current account balances. Now, if we look at oil export revenues versus value of total exports, we see from 1980 to 2015, the percentage has come down from almost 90% to almost 45%. Now, after looking at various macroeconomic parameters, you must have seen that the condition of OPEC countries is not very good, and it is primarily because of decreasing oil prices. So you must be wondering why oil prices are plummeting. Well, one major reason is the shale gas or the fracking industry in US. It has become a new challenge to OPEC market share. Also, the non-OPEC members such as Canada, Russia, China, US itself, their share in oil production has increased. Also, the downturn in global economy after financial crisis meant less demand for fuel. Well, these factors were demand supply driven. We have other factors as well, such as more awareness towards climate change. Hundreds of world leaders at the Paris Agreement have committed to limit carbon emissions from fossil fuels. And now we have solar technologies becoming steadily more competitive and prevalent. And before we conclude, this is an interesting infographic on how is the revenue from oil distributed. So if you look at all these developed countries, except US, the government of all these countries are making anywhere between 33 to 67% of revenue. Even in India, the situation is not very different. Even our government takes almost 55 to 60% in form of tax. Well, and a large part of it is spent as subsidy and other development programs. So we see our government is making more money than the oil producers. So with this, we can conclude our discussion on OPEC. In our next video, we will take up another organization.